Or you could translate this mature, and that would be okay too. Lacking in nothing. Alright? So, if any of you lacks wisdom, see, because he's still talking about the Word. See how easy this is to understand now? Once you understand that faith means the Word believed, now you know why James is suddenly talking about wisdom. Because you might have the Word in your head, but you're not wise about it. You don't know what it means. So you got the Word in you to produce the endurance. Okay, but one of the things you got to endure is not understanding it. So here's what you do. If you lack wisdom, ask God. You know how many times I say, ask God? You're probably sick of hearing me say it. Okay, well, this is why James is bringing it up. Because the word faith is not talking about your act of believing. It's talking about the word that's already resident in you. Alright? So if you don't understand it, ask God. And why is he writing that in verse 5? Because the people he's writing to weren't doing it. They weren't using the word they knew. Now, again, I've got to stress this. These are Jews he's writing to. You have to understand how Jews lived back then and even today. The one thing the Jews always do is they recite the word. Okay, that's what Paul was talking about in Romans 10:10. You're busy reciting the word. You got the word in your mouth, but you're not believing in it. Okay? Adonai Eloheinu. That means the Lord is our God. They're confessing to the Lord every Saturday. That's what Paul was talking about in Romans 10:10. Hey, you already got it in your mouth. You're already confessing He's Lord, so believe it already. It's the same problem here in James. Every Saturday, the 12 tribes are always having their Sabbath, and they're always reciting the word. It's always in their mouth and in their heart, in the sense of memorized, but they're not believing in it. Okay, that's the same problem James is talking about. You got the word in you. Okay, but do you believe it? Do you understand it? Well, ask God. You see? And here he goes. But he must ask in faith without any doubting. In other words, believe it. Because the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed. And there he's making mention of what Paul will later mention in Ephesians 4:14 about being children tossed. Okay? Because if you doubt, if you don't believe, see? This is post-salvation now. Believe that God is going to give you the wisdom. In other words, you better ask. Okay? Which means you want it. And you better believe you're going to get it. Because if you doubt God, then He's not going to answer you. See? But the guy doubting ought not to expect to receive anything, being double-minded and therefore unstable. Alright? Now, James takes an interesting turn here when he talks about poor versus rich. Because instead of trusting in the Lord, instead of asking for wisdom from God, and instead of asking in faith, he's now going to go into a very clever example of the guy who's in humble circumstances. Okay? So he's sort of doubting because he's poor, and the rich guy is doubting because he's rich. So the poor guy is kind of trusting in his humbleness, and the rich guy is kind of trusting in his riches. So that's why they're supposed to reverse what they're doing. Okay? Brother in humble position is supposed to glory in his high position. Because why? Because he's not doing that. Okay, the rich guy is supposed to glory in his humiliation. Why? Because he's not doing that. Because if you're asking of God and you're asking in faith, then everything else about your circumstances is the reverse. Okay? A lot of people preach on that passage as if, money was bad. That's not the point James is making. See, it's all going to end. That's the point. It's all going to end. Your poverty's going to end and your wealth is going to end. It's not worth your time trusting in it. Okay? So then he comes back to his initial theme, which is testing of your faith. Remember? Testing of the word in you. It gets tested. Paul's going to be hitting on that later when he writes Romans 12. So in a sense you can say Paul is quoting James. Okay? So he starts talking, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. For once he has been approved, Okay, Paul's going to be using that very same word, dokimazo, in Romans 12, 3, I think it is. Okay, yeah, dokimas. Let me show you. Okay. See, dokimas is the cognate noun from dokimazo. Dokimazo is used in Romans 12:3, I think. It's 12:3. Let's find out. Okay. 12:2. Sorry. See, that's why he had me check it. Okay, prove. Dokimazo. Okay, here's the actual. See. Okay, it's testing as a gemstone. Remember in 1 Corinthians 3, he's talking about, whether or not it's gold, silver, precious stones. Dokimazo is especially used for testing gemstones. Okay? So you get tested. And that's what, so I'm guessing now that Paul is quoting James. That's interesting. But anyway, I must keep going. All right, so the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved. Now see, what's being tested is the gemstone of the word in you. You get that? All right? The word in you. Remember, this is our theme here. The testing of your faith. The faith produces the endurance, not your faith. The word does the work. Here, endurance. Okay, so he's coming back to that theme, having digressed slightly to, with the introductory warning. Okay, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. And what is he persevering in? The word. Believing it. All right? And then he goes through another digression because, he's following his audience. Let no one say when he's tempted that God tempts. Well, Calvinism gets shot down right there. Okay, that's like saying who can resist his will, another version of that. And Paul picks up on that in Romans 2 and Romans 9:20, totally shooting down Calvinism, but that's beside the point. But let each one is tempted, is carried away by his own lust. When lust is conceived, okay, in other words, lust conceived, that's still temptation, but it gives birth. When it gives birth, that's when it becomes sin. And that's really important because he's going to make an analogy down here. He says you're persevering under trial. Don't accuse God when you're under trial, because you're being tempted by yourself. And then if you let it give birth, you give into the temptation, then that brings forth carnality. That's when you need 1 John 1:9. And he's telling them not to be deceived, because what he's doing is he's echoing the arguments that they're fighting. All right? So God doesn't tempt. God is light. Okay? Now, again, he comes back to, just so you can see how he's tracking it. All right? He's saying, where is it? Approved. That's the word approved in you. All right? Word of truth. You see that? He brought us forth by the word of truth. Okay, so he started it in 3. Okay, the word believed does the work. Let that work have its completing result. Okay, now he's talking about God's completion. Okay, God's completing. All right? God brought us forth. God birthed us by the word of truth. That's a nickname for Christ. Okay, that's also referencing Isaiah 53:11, Bedato Yatzdik in Hebrew, because it's by means of truth that he made us righteous. Okay, so James is referring back to that, which of course the Jerusalem believers all knew. They knew Isaiah 53:11 very well. Me'amal nafsho yireh yizbah. Bedato Yatzdik Tzadik Abdil Rabim. That's the verse in Hebrew. My bad pronunciation of the Hebrew. Okay? That we would be a kind of first fruits. First fruits is another nickname for Christ. Okay? The word of truth being replicated in you. See how it's the word works? It's not about your believing, although you got to believe in it. That's not what's being stressed. What's being stressed is that the word works. The word produces. The word produces fruit. Okay? The word works. The word in you works. And that's why he's talking about birth here. Because look, now he's saying, therefore, put aside all filthiness. Well, you can't do that on your own. And all that remains of wickedness, you can't do that on your own. And in humility, what? This you can do. Receive the word implanted. Implanted. Alright? Now, which is able to save your souls. This isn't talking about salvation because they're already believers. So what does it mean to say, able to save your souls?